Most of my talks are kind of software and existential dread. And I think this one is one of the more existential, dready talks. So I apologize if it's a bit of a weird downer in the morning, but something I really, really care about. So, open source exploitation. Now this is, I think, interestingly, the first time I've ever done this talk at an event run by a company whose entire business model is based around an open source product or an open core model. So whether I get stoned off stage at the end of this or not remains to be seen. Really combative title. The truth is I don't have a good title for this talk that works. It's horrible, it's difficult, and it's because all of the titles that I can think of for this material kind of sound so relentlessly negative that I honestly didn't want to use them. So what I want to promise you before we go in is that this talk is not about being negative, it's about the work that we have to do to be better as an industry. And as someone that doesn't believe in hills, and especially not walking up them or dying or really dying on them, this is literally the hill I will die on. So I want to talk today about how open source has, in most cases, been turned into exploitation by the biggest organizations in the world, and how it's used to extricate free labor from you, and why this is kind of fundamentally a bad thing. I'm also going to talk about how we can be better, and I'm going to talk about what needs to change to make software, and especially open source software, something that I really, really dearly love actually survive. Because right now, I kind of feel that open source software is in the most precarious place it's ever been in its entire existence, and I feel like not really that many people are talking about it. So, to anyone that hasn't met me, there's a photo of me that looks nicer than I look in person. I appreciate that I'm somewhat conspicuous, so I've written a few books and I built a load of web scale stuff in the UK, kind of big e-commerce. I've taught a bunch of kids. And what I like doing most of the time is really playing with technology, and I use the word play quite a lot because I think this talk is one of the most important things I ever wrote, and a lot of it is about how, we all come from this place of play originally. I don't know if it's going to resonate or if you're going to care by the end, but let's get going. So, I want to talk about loving things before we talk about software, because in technology especially, we're often quite bad at criticism, right? So, most importantly, I want to talk about how it's important to understand that you can be critical of something that you love because you want it to be better, not because you want to harm it, right? I've been building open source software since the actual 1990s. It's just hair dye. So when the internet was a village, right? And everything was really, really tiny. And, the truth is I was tiny, I was young. And it's important to understand that on any journey towards maturity as a discipline, opinions and approaches that get you from point A to point B are not necessarily the things that are going to get you from point B to point C. As you change and as your context changes, your behaviors have to change to survive. People really frequently struggle with this fact, right? Humans are these beautiful, often kind of simple, patterned creatures that presume that because something has worked before, that it's going to work again regardless of the changing context around them. And as technologists and as an industry, we're going to have to embrace change if we want open source to survive. Now, okay, open source won the fight. You've seen this written 1,000 times everywhere. You probably use Visual Studio Code, at the very least as a text editor. As of 2018, which is now, I don't know, almost a decade ago, that's terrifying, 40% of VMs on Microsoft Azure were running Linux, right? Open source won the hearts and minds of people by telling them that software could and should be free. But I think when it comes to free, people often had foundational misunderstandings of what free really meant. So while the GPL and its variants were probably not the first permissive and free software licenses, what they were is they were licenses that rapidly gained mindshare with the rising popularity of Linux in the late 90s, right? Now, Linux, whether you love it or hate it, was kind of the tip of the spear that pushed open source software into the mainstream. And the GPL license that kind of came with Linux was originally described by the Free Software Foundation as free as in speech, not as in beer, Just out of curiosity, hands up if you think you understand what that sentence means, because it's a weird one. Yeah, I always have this. It's very, very normal, right? It's really a confounding statement that a lot of people never really got their heads around. So what does the GPL really mean? Now, in really simple terms, if you use source code available under its license, that you need to make your changes public for other people to use, right? And this is because the Free Software Foundation promoted something that they called software freedoms. Literally, the right of software to be liberated from you, from its authors, so that its users could modify, inspect, and make and own their changes, right? So it was nothing to do with cost and everything to do with freedom. Now, this is a really noble goal, right? Like, it shows its lineage as the license used to build a Unix clone that was supposed to be freely available to all because the operating system was too expensive for the students that were working with it, right? And they couldn't change it, and they didn't have access to it. So really, that was a goal centered around people sharing source code at local computer clubs, like really in the 80s and 90s. That was the historical context. So it's really important to stress that free never meant free from cost or free at the point of consumption. It always meant free as in freedom. And in fact, so much of the original literature around this focuses on this by describing software that is free of cost as gratis, things you get gratis. Now, there's been such a key misunderstanding that it's literally right there in the FAQ on the Free Software Foundation webpage, right? They ask, does free software mean using the GPL? And the answer, to quote, is, not at all. There are many other free software licenses. We have an incomplete list that we maintain. Any license that provides the user certain specific freedoms is a free software license. Then why should I use the GNU GPL rather than other free software licenses? Well, using the GPL requires that all of the released improved versions also be free software. This means you can avoid the risk of having to compete with proprietary, modified versions of your own work. Keep that in your head. So, okay, cool. So if it wasn't really that version of free software that won, though, right? So despite Linux, and despite these kind of early limited forays into open source software by organizations like Red Hat, using strong copyleft licenses like the GPL, and copyleft literally means the thing on the right got copied to the left, right? The GPL wasn't the reason that open source actually is thriving in the market today, not even remotely. Like, Linux was cool, it was kind of free, but it's always the year of Linux on the desktop. And it's certainly not the reason that the ultra megacorps like Microsoft and Amazon or Google now champion open source software. Now, the widespread adoption of open source software in the enterprise is directly related to the MIT and Apache licenses, the permissive licenses that followed these more viral copyleft licenses. Specifically because they don't force people that build on top of the software to reshare their modifications back to the wider communities. Those licenses aren't free software licenses. They don't guarantee software freedom. Now, permissive licensing allowed individual organizations to take your work, build on top of it, and even operate those modified copies of the work for a profit, right? And much like the GPL, the aim of open source was not to restrict commercial exploitation, but to ensure the freedom of the software itself. So who benefits from permissive licensing then? It's a tricky question, really. In any situation in the world where there is a power imbalance between, let's say, if I were to pick a really specific example, the 4 largest companies in the world and you. Got a bit of bad news for you. So yeah, the organization that has the means to leverage might and power is always going to be able to over the individual that will benefit. So, okay, here's the thing. Open source became popular because of permissive licenses strictly. And without wanting to sound like a naysayer, because again, I assure you, I deeply, deeply love open source software and software freedom and the combined value that adds to teaching and our peers and each other. I cannot say loud enough, multinational organizations do not give a single solitary fuck about you at all, right? Businesses do not care about you. But you know what they do care about, right? They care about free value that they're able to commercially exploit, right? This is just a fact. The wide proliferation of software in business is a direct result of licenses like the Apache license, like the MIT license, being leveraged into closed source, proprietary, and for-profit work. Now, want to test this theory? We've got a really fun game. Go into your office tomorrow and try just stick some GPL code into your code base and see how your manager responds. Dare you, right? Permissive licenses explicitly and without recourse shift the balance of power towards large technical organizations and away from individual authors and creators. They have the might to leverage code, they have the capability to build upon it, and they have the incentive and, more importantly, organizational structures to profit from doing so. You do not have that structure around you to profit from software. Open source software specifically took hold in the enterprise because it allowed itself to be exploited. Oh, exploitation, that's a really, like, such a loaded word, right? Oh, you can't say exploited. Really, really accurate when you, I don't know where the screen is there. Really, really accurate when you read the definition, right? Like, such a negative slant that's surely not fair. What is it? The act of or fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work. Ugh, awkward. Maybe number 2 will be better for us. The action of making use and benefiting from resources. The fact of making use of a situation to gain unfair advantage for oneself. Tick, tick, tick. And, you know, the internet runs on exploited and unpaid labor, right? That's the truth. You've all seen this. Like, everybody has seen this XKCD. It's like the most famous of all time. It's just the truth, right? It's widely reported that the vast majority of open source projects are not funded, even important ones. There is no art without patronage, right? None. And the only successful open source projects in the world are either backed by large organizations that use them for strategic marketing and product positioning advantage, or rely on the exploitation of free labor for the gain of organizations operating these products as services. Those are the 2 categories. And I can see you frothing at the mouth already, but GitHub has donations. What about Patreon? I donated one time, right? And, you know, the truth is, whenever people say things like that, I just see them undermine their own arguments, right? We've all watched people burn out. We've all watched people trying to do dual licensing get verbally assaulted by their own peers for not being free enough for them or pious enough for them, right? It's like a giant purity contest. We've watched people go to the effort of the legal legwork to sell support contracts and have single-digit instances of those contracts get sold, right? We've seen, you know, in the .NET ecosystem, packages with 20 million downloads languish because nobody is willing to pay for the work. It victimizes creators, right? I would not wish a successful open source project on anybody. So I asked the internet, right? You know, the thing you do when you've got an idea, oh, this seems really bad, I suppose I should post this online and see what people think about it. Oh boy. So I made the observation on Reddit that it's utterly wild that I can open Twitch, I can stream myself reading an open source code base out loud and saying, oh, I like the look of that, or I don't like the look of this, on YouTube and Twitch, and people will happily pay me to profit from it. But the open source community has become so wrong-headed that the idea of charging for the software itself is anathema to them. Like, it's absolutely absurdist humor. So, yes, some direct quotes. Oh, so you hate GCC and Linux too, since they're developed by and for companies. Well, I didn't fucking say I hated companies, did I? Arguing against free software. What year is this? Fine. It's free. Why wouldn't it be free for everybody? And that includes organizations. I'm honestly not clear what you're suggesting specifically and logistically. Oh, fuck me. So obviously, like, I got downvoted to hell because everybody seemed to interpret, like, perhaps multinational organizations should pay you for your work. Seemed like a fairly uncontroversial point, to I don't think software freedom is good, actually. And, you know, I was mostly more astonished, though, by people suggesting that charging for software was somehow in contradiction with the ethos of open source, when all that position really showed was their astonishing lack of literacy in what open source was really about at the start, right? But it's just kind of seeped into the general consciousness in this really misinformed way. So let's talk about Metallica, right? Why not? God, Lars Ulrich was right. I think I'm like the only person that's ever got up on a stage and said Lars Ulrich was right. Like, it's unfortunate for him. Okay, so how many of you are pushing 40? Okay, sorry to shame you. Stole music from Napster? Yeah, there we go, right. Okay, so in 1999, Napster heralded the popularization of peer-to-peer file sharing networks, and Metallica litigated, right? They were absolutely vilified by the world for doing this. They were parodied to hell. So the music business had become a corporate fat cat. It had nickeled and dimed everybody with exorbitant CD prices. You know, we're talking £20, let's say 20 euros, whatever, in 1999 money for a single album. Bands were seemingly filthy rich, and record executives even more so. And we all cried, what the fuck do Metallica know about music, right? They're rich already. Like, how do they care? We just want to get some new music. Like, why is file sharing wrong? And, I spent my mid-teens pirating music on Napster, Audio Galaxy, LimeWire, Kazaa, Direct Connect. I stole from them all. And you know what? If anyone had spent time actually listening to what Lars Ulrich, the drummer from Metallica, was actually saying at the time, they would realize he was absolutely 100% correct. And in the 2 decades since has been completely vindicated in what he said. Let me find the quote. Okay, there it is. So I read an interview with him recently, right? And he looks back on it, and he's really reflective, actually. Like, Lars, despite his reputation, is quite an introspective and smart man. Actually, is he from here? Yeah, he's from here. So what he actually said at the time was this: we're devaluing the work of musicians. It doesn't affect me at all, but it will affect every band that comes after me. I'm already a multimillionaire. File sharing devalues the work, and once it's done, it can never be undone. Oh. Yeah, so after 1999, the music industry was never the same, right? Small touring bands that would make a comfortable living scrape by in 2025. Niche and underground genres, which, while are more creatively vibrant than ever, absolutely cannot financially sustain themselves. It literally doesn't scale anymore. We devalued the work by giving it all away. I have friends in internationally known touring bands that work jobs while they're on tour and headlining festivals. This is today. And when you give it all away, the only people that profit are the large organizations that are in power. Spotify today occupies the space that the music labels once did, a vastly profitable large organization thriving while the artists figuratively and sometimes literally starve. And also, they kind of did it by stealing all the music to start with and then got the legal agreements later, right? Like, kind of scummy. Yeah, so this is where we are today. Really interesting, right? I wish I had the fine wine collection and art collection that Lars Ulrich has, but forgive me for feeling a little bit like I'm standing here desperately hoping that people realize that this is where we are. Now, so I love open source. Just like Lars loved the tape trading scene and the underground scene that he grew up in, right? Lars Ulrich grew up trading music. But the way in which we allow it to be weaponized is a violence, and it doesn't put humans and maintainers and creators at its center. Instead, it puts organizational exploitation as a core goal. And we all made this really tragic mistake in thinking that the ownership model that was great for our local computing clubs and our local music tape trading scenes was great for something that could scale to planet size, right? The context changed around us and we didn't change. And here's the really, really scary part, right? Like, we got here because this is what we wanted. I did this. I did this. You did this. We all made these mistakes. I spent the last 15 years advocating for the adoption of open source technologies in mid to large size organizations myself. I myself sat and wrote policies that suggested that while we needed to adopt and contribute if we could, organizations never do, to open source for both strategic and marketing benefit, that we really should only look to permissive licensing because, you know, anything else would incur some kind of cost at best and force us to give away our software and lose our IP. And God damn it, I was wrong. It was me and I was wrong and I fucked it. I should have instead spent that time advocating that we licensed dual license software, that we bought support contracts, that we participated in copyleft software and gave back specifically to the community that was contributing. I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I let everyone down. But here's the problem, it wasn't just me, right? Like, it's not like I broke software. Every time a small organization or creator tries to license their software in a way that protects them from the exploitation of big business, like Elasticsearch when Amazon ate them, or recently like Apollo GraphQL where the internet forsook them, or numerous other examples. There's like, you know, every 2 months that go by, there's another organization that says we can't afford to pay our bills. How about we sell you some software? And the internet tries to set them on fire, right? The community just savages them without realizing that every time you do that, you're literally savaging yourselves. And we need to be better at supporting each other, at knowing that whenever a creator cries burnout, or that they can't pay rent in kudos, or that they need to advertise for work in their NPM package install scripts, that maybe it's you, maybe it could be you next in that position who can't pay their bills and desperately is like putting a command prompt thing in that pisses everybody off. So what I think is that we need new licenses and a new culture that prioritize the freedom of people from exploitation over the freedom of software, right? And, you know, ultimately, I want you to get paid, right? I want you to have nice things, and I want you to work sustainably. What I want really is a world where it's viable for smart people to build beautiful things and make a living because of it, right? And if we have to operate inside some kind of late-stage capitalist hellhole, I want it to be on our terms. Okay, so this also isn't just like a single contributor problem, right? Like the development community has this weird misaligned idea that the trust relationship it has between smaller independent software vendors that gets continually conflated with people's love for free at the point of consumption software and the open source that these vendors, they kind of suffer the same outrage as independent maintainers when expectations are not met, right? Every time a small company, and you know, it happened recently with HashiCorp, right? Like HashiCorp had to sell because people decided to fork all their tools that they'd been using for a decade, right? And you know, the stunning lack of, I suppose, reflection always gets me. And you know, this example, last year, it flared up particularly in the tooling space, right? Where the closed source tool Postman, an API testing tool, which, you know, it's really great. It's a closed source tool. And you go to its website and they talk about its open source API philosophy. And I'm like, the fuck does that mean? That's not a thing. Those words don't mean anything in that order. Anyway, that's an aside, right? It changed its licensing model to be more expensive, right? Resulting in this mass migration to a competing open source tool called Insomnia, which of course swiftly changed its own feature set to match because they couldn't cope with the users. Basically, they started requiring logins for users and received, again, the same backlash. And then everyone moved like a swarm to the next open source project and the next one. The mere thought of Insomnia trying to walk towards monetization and sustainability was enough to turn the noses of users who were just so conditioned to getting everything for free. And, you know, not just API tooling, I mentioned HashiCorp. And all they did was they changed their licensing, resulting in a load of forks that have now gone stale. Because, of course, people realized that HashiCorp as an organization had a shitload of engineers maintaining that software, and just forking the thing in anger is not the same as doing something about it. So it's nice to see the community step up at that pivotal moment. But at the same time, it's not very nice to see the community not thinking what it really means to step up and support like a piece of software with users. Okay, so this is relevant to this. This is how I don't get stoned off stage at the end of this. Can companies ever ethically interact with open source? Absolutely yes. Okay, of course we can do a good job of this, right? And I think this is a little bit of light before I talk about what I think we need to do to readdress this imbalance. I think there are companies that do really good work in the open source space and they fund it really well, right? They all have reasons for doing so, right? And even some of our biggest players have reasonably ethical open source products. I mean, to be fair to Microsoft, of all people, they've done a pretty good job of being like, yes, we know you're the product and we're giving you free things, but hey, at least we're giving you free things, right? There's an exchange of value there. Often companies will do it for their marketing position, or companies with open core models like Umbraco, right, who develop a product that people can build a community and an ecosystem around and build small ISVs around. Like, I think these are all fairly ethical exchanges of value in an open source ecosystem. But I think as we interact with organizations that effectively fund open source in this way, there's nothing wrong with taking the software they make available, but remember that when it's free, that your patronage is the product, right? And even the projects that you may perceive to be independent all have funding structures provided by major organizations. Like, okay, do you know who funds Linux? It's basically Microsoft and Intel, right? Like, they pay the bills. Who funds Firefox? Well, that would be Google to keep them out of antitrust court, right? Like, when you look at all this stuff, and I suppose Apple because of the search contracts, the open source software that you produce is not the same kind of open source software that large organizations do, right? And it's foolish to perceive the thing you build and the thing they build to be the same thing. So, how can we change the status quo? We need, I think, both better approaches, better systems, along with the cooperation of major vendors in the spaces to make a dent in this problem. And it's not going to be easy, but I think there's a role in this for all of us. Okay, so this is the easiest thing and the most free way that you can solve this problem. The next time each of you is about to send that shitty tweet, zeet, whatever we're calling small blogs these days, because Docker Desktop made delaying updates a paid feature, just for a second, maybe wonder why they might be doing that, right? Like, if they are so worried about their funding structure that they're willing to fuck off all of their users, right, which risks people switching to an alternate product, times are really hard, maybe don't try savage them. Like, the next time you see a library you like adopting an open core licensing model where the value-added features or the integrations are paid for, consider paying for the features. Whenever a maintainer asks for support or contribution on something you use, if you can, contribute back. Right? It's a very, very lonely place to maintain a lot of open source software, especially in the .NET ecosystem. I know our maintainers really, really struggle. So don't be entitled, don't shout down your peers, and don't troll them for trying to make a living. Like, if we all behaved like this, the software world would be a lot kinder and just like a nicer place. I think it's also time to rehabilitate all the package management. So I think it's table stakes for the next iteration of package managers and component sharing platforms to support billing in their APIs. I myself would move to a platform that put creator sustainability at its center at a heartbeat's notice. I would learn a new programming language. I would learn a new set of tools if they were trying to build an ecosystem. And I kind of have a theory, really, that more organizations would pay for software if there were existing models that supported or allowed it, right? Like, most projects couldn't issue an invoice or pay taxes or accept credit cards if they tried. But I think that the next generation of platforms needs to support this, like, creator sustainability. I feel like we're seeing the first steps towards this with, like, nascent projects. Like, there's a project called SDK Bin, which is like NuGet with billing in it. It's kind of gone dark and is being rethought, but there's like the start of an idea here. And I think also we really need to petition all the platform owners and vendors, like, as a step up. I want to pay for the libraries that I use in my Azure bill, in my AWS bill, in my GCP bill. whilst it might feel like throughout this talk I've kind of railed against large organizations leveraging open source, I think that large organizations aren't fundamentally bad, immoral, or evil. I just believe they operate in their best interest, right? That's all they do. And the first platform that lets me sell software components can have a cut. Fuck it, give them an app store model. Like, why not? Take 20%. 20% of something is better than 20% of nothing, right? You know, I think this would really unlock a whole category of software sales that just don't exist trivially in the market today. Imagine that instead of trying to work through some asinine procurement process, you could just add a NuGet, NPM, cargo package, and it just gets accounted for and charged appropriately by your cloud platform vendor over a private package feed. I think this is the best thing that the big vendors can do to support creators. They could really make a marketplace. They could make an impact. And I think that's one that could be sustainable for everyone inside of it. I think there's a really interesting angle here with like communities like maybe the Umbraco community or the Unity community to almost go your own way with package feeds that support this category of monetization. Like, there's no reason you can't have your own stores. We see it in asset stores in gaming, right? Like, it works. And I think we really need to keep fighting for free software, kind of for users, for teachers, for your friends, right? Like, I feel like I really need to double down about what I said at the start. Like, I love open source software, truly, truly do. I want it to survive. Like, but we have to understand that what got it to a place of success is something that is currently threatening its sustainable existence. Open source doesn't have to be a proxy for the exploitation of the individual. It can be ethical, it can survive this. And I don't want to take your source code away from you, right? I just desperately want you to have enough people think critically about it that when it's your great new idea that you think you can do something meaningful with, that it's you that can execute on and benefit from the idea, right? By all means, give it away to your peers. I would give anything I make away to my friends any day of the week, but spare no pity for large organizations that want to profit from your work at your expense, right? Oh my God, Microsoft can't adopt my package. Well, fuck them, candidly. So, you can support the scene, right? Like in music, there's this idea of supporting the scene. It's very like, I don't know, musical purity thing. Like we see it as our heritage, the kind of the shared place where the art comes from. This is our culture. Like, and honestly, I think open source is one of the coolest kind of cultural touchstones of the software industry. It's the thing that is uniquely ours that we didn't borrow from manufacturing or engineering or any of those other things that we aren't really, right? So, you know, what I do is I pay my friends for their software, even when I don't use it. I have licenses to all sorts of open source software, because really, how much does it cost me personally to show my support, right? And I would accept it gracefully if someone paid me for something that I did, right? There's nothing wrong with exchanging money. Okay, so let's talk about charity a little bit, because charity's super interesting. So over the past couple of years, as this problem has started to bubble up from the substrate of technology, it started to become too big to ignore, right? And we've seen a bunch of alternative funding approaches that start to appear. We've seen people crowdfund projects on Kickstarter to mix success. We've seen people operate Patreons, I never know, where people get early access to binaries or source code. We've seen GitHub introduce sponsorship, and companies notably occasionally sponsoring open source projects for internal funds, right? So every so often you see that tweet go around, oh my God, Amazon just gave me $5,000, right? From like those 5 dudes. And to be honest, it always makes me feel really deeply conflicted. Now, a long time ago, I worked in the third sector in the UK, which is what we call the charity sector. And at the end of my tenure there, I was kind of left feeling like excellent charity never excuses a poor welfare state, right? That, like, people make the mistake that charity is this kind of grace of God good thing. And actually, what I saw in the charity sector was a lot of small people failing to make an impact because they were thinking too local and they cared too much, but they weren't being smart, right? And this stuff always looks like that to me, right? You know, I applaud creators who are making grassroots funding techniques work for them. I think that's really cool. But it's almost uniformly by effectively charging for software licenses, right? They're just charging for software licenses without using the language of software licensing. And in that sense, kind of Kickstarter and Patreon is really probably like the thin end of the wedge to readdress some of these problems. But they just come with like a lot of really problematic elements, right? Where they ask more of creators than the work that's on offer. You know, Kickstarter and Patreon often have this like weird parasocial relationship subtext where people expect access and like a degree of service from an individual that's maybe a bit toxic. It's a bit kind of consumer entitlement flavored. And you know, frankly, with all respect to Microsoft, that's how I don't lose my MVP, right? GitHub sponsorships are literally the absolute fucking least they can do. Like, Jesus Christ, a tip jar. Really? Like, companies spending some money on a project is better than nothing, like literally better than nothing at all, but in many cases really just pales in comparison to traditional dual licensing alternatives, right? In this space, I think it's really illuminating, and that reportedly, early versions of NuGet contained room for payment billing information in the spec, and they were removed before they published NuGet because they didn't think it would go down well with the community. I mean, I kind of agree with them. It probably wouldn't have gone down well with the community then, but they were right. We need more than charity to fix this. Let's do right, okay, so this is, I wrote this bit of the content at 8:20 this morning, so we're gonna go with this. It wouldn't be 2025 if I didn't talk about the AI thing, right? Like the AI thing that everyone always wants to talk about. So I think open source software has become the training data for code completion models everywhere, right? Like the AI models have kind of cannibalized all of our work now, and it leaves me really, really like deeply conflicted. I think there's this truism, right? The current leap in learning models and transformer models is one of the most interesting things that's ever happened in my technical career, right? And it doesn't matter whether you agree with the outcome necessarily. The fact that we have a general purpose algorithm that can chew through large data sets without us having to write specific code for it is a technological advance. Right? It's interesting. It enables a category of situations. There's kind of a problem here because people think of it as intelligence, right? And people have really kind of screwed it up by calling it AI, and marketers love calling things AI. But what we have is a general purpose computing algorithm that produces statistical models. Super interesting. Cool. Unfortunately, it's had to eat all of our work to get us there. Bit awkward, quite devastating to some people. And I think two things can be true at the same time here. I was mulling this over the other day, and I thought, has the advent of LLMs kind of opened up the democratization of software that the Free Software Foundation was ironically trying to reach for originally in the most tyrannical, exploitative way? And it's like, oh shit, like these two things kind of coexist. And I kind of hate it, and I don't know how it makes me feel. However, one of the things that does make me think is that we've made this terrible mistake in thinking of intelligence as a measure of computation, right? Intelligence, in the human sense, you think about it as how hard you can think. What if you look at intelligence as a latent property of data that exhibits itself at a certain critical mass? And what we've really just done is we found this like general approach to shining a light on this property. Hey, a large quantity of data can expose the statistical average of a thing. Super interesting. Right, so where does this take us ethically? I think I'm coming to this understanding, right, that like, whilst you will see some open source contributors be very, very violently opposed to the way that AI is playing, and you see shitty AI pull requests and like horrible low-value content, I can't help thinking that models that are trained on open data should be legislated to be forced into the open. And this is how we fix this problem. Like, we've kind of got this social contract with things like search engines that have implicitly existed on the internet up until now, right? Where like, you know, we don't really believe in copyright is kind of the truth as a technology industry, and anyone that says they do is fucking lying to you, right? Like, we've been stealing things and publishing things forever when it's convenient to us. And we've got this tacit understanding, yeah, of course, you can index my content. That's technically a breach of copyright, right? Oh, you can reproduce portions of it. Well, technically a breach of copyright. We're not going to solve this problem with copyright. But we could force, by law, organizations that train models on the open web to make the models and the weights public domain. They can still capitalize on them by operating them for profit. They can run them for you. You can have your mid-journeys or whatever, right? They can operate them as a service, but by forcing models derived from publicly accessible data into the public, I think we might reach a balanced, equitable exchange of value that solves this like LLM shit show problem that we have at the moment. So I think maybe that's where we might be going, because I tell you what won't work. We're not going to be able to legislate the companies to not steal the things, because the only tool we have is to go and ask them, hey, did you steal from me? And they'll be like, no, Scout's honor. And it's like, cool, okay, right. But we can force them to give us their shit. So maybe that's the answer to the AI problem. That was an 8:20 this morning thought, so maybe I'm wrong. I also want to talk a little bit, finally, about a bit of a model we might have for the future. So in the couple of years, maybe 4 years, I've been thinking about this deeply. I keep on going to Microsoft every time I can and being like, so, put billing in NuGet, you shits. And I turn up at every meeting I can turn up to and be like, so billing when? Billing in Azure when? Billing in NPM when? And they're like, oh, but it's really, really complicated. We couldn't possibly do that. And they've got themselves stuck in this mental model where they have to solve the entirety of the problem before they're willing to commit to it, right? So I think the future of this is this. Fuck solving the business problem. We need to add telemetry, right? And I think that we need to continue to pressure Microsoft to add into all of their various, they control all the package feeds, basically, for all the significant languages. They need to start metering monthly active users, which we can use as a proxy for seats. They need to start metering instances of downloads, and they need to introduce one-shot licensing. They don't need to solve the business model for people, right? It's not their responsibility, but they need to provide the metadata to creators to build their own billing structures over so people can experiment in this space, right? And I think people will see that, and they will start to experiment, and it will give us the infrastructure to actually solve this problem. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm starting to work on a spec, right, for NuGet and NPM based on their APIs, just so I can take it to them and say, hey, you keep on telling me this problem's too hard to solve, fucking solved it for you, right? And they're going to look at it and go, oh, that's totally, totally wrong. You should do it like, I'm like, keep going, you should do it like how, right? So that's the conversation I think we now need to have with them. We need to show them a bad thing so they can tell us what we should have thought in the first place. And I think it probably just looks like, you know, a header for an organization ID or some opaque string in all the API calls. You get roll-up stats, you make your billing profiles, they bill you through Azure, done. Not so hard, right? The common counterpoint to this is always like, but if we do this, people are going to cache their packages and they're going to do this. If people are going to steal from you, they're going to steal from you. Don't worry about them. They're not your audience, right? Not going to happen. So, yeah, I think that might be the future of this thing, and I'm going to continue applying as much pressure as I possibly can to make it happen, because I would like you all to be able to eat. Take that away from this talk, please. Thanks for listening.